Okay, so in the previous tutorial, I did just a simplified overview of keyframing. We took a little box and made it slide across the floor. So in class the other day, I took students through the creation of a very simple little rig that I like to call Boxee. And it's just a little cube, looks like a little cube like gumdrop, I guess. That I have students animate, and I have a full rig that has a lot of bend and twist and squash and stretch, and even has a little eyeball that it can blink. But instead of just giving the character to students without giving them any context, what I always do this is make sure that we build kind of a simple version of this, so students understand like what the pieces of the rig are. And then in class, I ask students to do a little animation calisthenics, where we did a little animating, and maybe I'll bring that up in the second tutorial. But the first one, let's go ahead and just create this little character. And I've created just a default scene, and as always, we're going to use 24 frames per second in here, our rendering. Let's go ahead, just as I did in the other tutorial, create a cube. I think I made this 30 by 30 by 30, and I made the ground plane something like, I don't know, let's make it 2000 maybe. Just kind of a big giant floor for it to animate across, and I'll make this 30 by 30, the subdivisions, for no other reason than I can just see what is going on the surface, and I can go up to the filter here. The filter in these 3D views allows us to turn on and off everything that's visually shown in the screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the work plane there, because I'm using the plane here as my work plane. The other thing that's problematic, right, is my little cube is sticking through the floor there. So let's go to coordinates and move it up half the total height of the object, since half was above and half was below, and you can see it's now perfectly situated there. And as I did in the other one, we're going to go freeze all transformations, which again zeroes out these numbers here and hides that transformation. What it's saying is the object is 15 units away from the origin, and then we kind of translate that information over here so that we now will consider this the new. It's basically just a little Houdini hide trick, right? It's just like, I used to have 15 units in my Y direction, but I froze them and they're now hidden and you cannot see them anymore. Okay, so we have the cube. The one thing that I want to do with the cube is I want to be able to bend it. So we're going to add a deformer, and the deformers are up here, as almost everything is in cinema, right? So here's the deformer list. And the very first one is the bend, very popular, very useful, right? A bend tool. So if I zoom out here, you can see that I do have this big box. It has an arrow pointing up, it has an arrow pointing to the side. We'll examine that here in a second. If I click on the bend and I go to the object, it has some strength parameters. You can see that it's doing something, right? It's bending, but it's not really, it's just by itself bending. And it's just this hollow deformer. It's not affecting the object. So deformers need to be children of the things that we want to deform. So let's go ahead and drag that below the cube. It's kind of like, think of it this way, if I didn't have bones inside my body, then I would have a hard time moving, because they're driving what it is that I'm doing. Sorry, a little distraction there. My cat was having some kind of emergency. It just wanted to cry for no reason. Anyways, I think I was saying that we make sure that the deformer is a child of the object that we want to deform. And if I go back to the bend now and I change its strength, you can see I get this little dancing cube. But this is not, I hope you understand basically what we want. So we'll go back over to the bend, and most of the deformers have this little handy fit to parent, so that we can make sure that it is the right size. I could just dial it in. I can make it 30 by 30 by 30 centimeters, or just fit to parent. And it will evaluate kind of the general size of the object. Here it's easy because it's just a cube, and the bend deformer is a cube. But creates this kind of cage over the surface. And if we go back to the strength now, you can see that it is bending. Let's zoom in here, actually. Don't need to stay that far out, right? So if we bend here, it is kind of bending, right? It's more like it's shearing across the surface, because it doesn't have any subdivisions in it, right? It's like a finger without any knuckle, as I like to say. So let's go back to the cube and let's look at its segments, and this happens to be the Y direction, right? The up direction. So let's just increase this by 1, and you can see now I have 2 segments. So I have a set of vertices and edges that can be affected there, and I can make it 3, I can make it 4. Let's go all the way up to 10. I kind of like that. And this makes it nice and smooth. If I get really close, I can see that it's, these are little straight lines in here. So it's not perfectly smooth, but we're not probably going to be able to see that, especially when we add the next part of this. So I'm going to turn that to 1 for a second and turn the bend down to 0% again. And the other part of this is what I want to do is subdivide it 10 by 10 by 10, because I don't like it when the cube has these perfect little edges. Our cube's going to squash and stretch and bend and everything. So I don't want it to look rigid. I want it to look like a gumdrop or a piece of Jello or something like that, right? So I want to soften it a little bit. So within the cube, I can use one of these generators. So let's come over here. If I click on this, the generator generates surfaces, gives us geometry for the most part. And the one that we're going to use the most easily would be this subdivision surface. And the subdivision surface, you can see this little icon. It's like there's a cube cage around a gumdrop, right? So if I click on this, it will just add to the scene. And what I would do would add the cube object or whatever piece of geometry I'm working with to the subdivision surface. The other way to do this, which I'll do, is if I select the cube and hold down the Option or Alt key, and I select one of these generators, again, we're going to use the subdivision surface, it will automatically parent the selected object to that generator. And you can see we get this rounded surface. So what's happening is it's dividing it once and dividing it again. Actually, let's turn this to 1. So it took 1 polygon here and it divided it once, right? So 1 becomes 4, cuts in the middle here. And if I give it another subdivision, it divides it again across that surface. So 1 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16, 16 becomes 64. So you can see there's a lot of exponential growth to round off. In fact, let's just do that. Right, so I get more edges, and it's always rounding it off, not just in 2 dimensions, but in 3 dimensions. So maybe more than you need to know right now, other than the fact that I don't really want the cube to look like a sphere. I want the cube to look like a cube that has slightly soft edges. So if I put, let's just say 3 subdivisions in here, you can see I get kind of a lumpy, I don't know, it still could look like a piece of candy or a gumdrop, right? But I want something a little tighter that looks more like a cube, just with some, there we go, with just these soft rounded edges. Now someone in class, brilliant suggestion or question, I guess, is, well, what's the difference between that and doing another cube, which again, this would be 30 by 30. And I'll move that over, 30. And we'll move it up 15, right? And for the object itself would be, and let's make that like 1. Right, so these look fairly similar to each other, but the issue here is if I put a bend deformer on this object, it would not be nice and smooth. It wouldn't bend because it doesn't have any subdivisions here in the middle. So the reason this is working well for us is because we want to have kind of an even distribution, because we want it to bend evenly. We want it to deform evenly. But if this were just some cube that I was just going to place in the background in my scene, it's like whatever object, it's something your character's going to sit on, you absolutely could do it just like this because it doesn't need to deform. But in this case it does. So that one's not going to work. So let's go back to the bend, and you can see that here is our object, and you can see it's bending quite nicely. It has these, nice round edges, a perfect little curvature. The one thing you can see with our object is if I keep dialing up the strength, the object will just keep bending, right? And this, in some instances, maybe might be what you want, but in our case, what we want to do is keep length. So when we do bend the object, it won't grow, right? It won't stretch it to make it follow that. Again, depends on what you want to do, but here we want it to kind of retain its shape a little bit. The other thing too about our little Boxee character is that for the most part, I would say when you create a character, the way that it would face, like its forward direction, would be along the Z. The X would be side to side, and the Y would be up and down. And right now for the bend, it's kind of side to side. And that would be okay other than the fact that we're going to animate the character so it's moving forward or backwards. And so we want the bend to happen in the front and the back, not the left and the right. So the way, easy enough to dial this in and figure it out. So if I put the strength here, I can rotate the angle to get it to line up where I want it. So let's just say 90. It could also be minus 90, honestly. Right, it would just flip the direction of that, but we'll just say 90 degrees. And now when we do our bend, it's front to back. Based on this kind of accepted paradigm that for the most part, the Z would be your forward direction, right? In the Boxee character that I have later on, the eyeball is actually here in the center, so it's a little clearer which would be the front and which would be the back. Okay, so we have this bend here, and we have the angle. The nice thing about this angle is that you can animate both of these, right? In the ankle, you can do cool things like this, right? So you can roll as long as there's some kind of bend, okay? As long as the strength is something other than 0, it spins, right? That deformer, and you can see it right there. You can see the icon for the deformer spinning around, like where its orientation is, right? Which is kind of fun. So you can get a lot of little gestures out of your character, like looking over here. Like, oops, let's make this way. Let's put this back. Right, so I can get it to flex one way or the other, like it's looking or shrugging its shoulders. 0 and 90. Okay, so we now have a ground plane, we have a subdivision surface, we have a cube itself. The last thing I want to do, just so when I move the cube, I don't want to actually select this here. Generally what you would do in animation is you would have some kind of controller. Think of it like you wouldn't reach down if you were doing a little puppet show. You wouldn't reach down and grab the arm of the puppet. You would have a string, right, that you would be used to move the puppet itself. So it would seem like invisible that it was being animated a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing here. Is we're going to create a primitive spline object. So in class I did a circle, which is not a bad way to go. I could also do a rectangle, I guess. Let's do the rectangle, I think. So where did the rectangle go? Well, it made this very big one out here. And for most primitive objects, whenever they come into the world, they have kind of a default orientation. So you can change the plane orientation. This one says X and Y because it's the X and the Y that I can see. I can't see the Z axis, right? So it's aligned along the X and the Y. It doesn't have any depth, if you want to think of it that way, along the Z. But in this case, what we want to be as the X and the Z, right? So it's right here, sticking out of that little surface. It's actually so perfect on that cube, you can't really see it that well. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller, 45 maybe, 45, there we go. Right, so now we have a little, this the spline that I can select, and we'll just name it actually. I think I did this in class. Boxee control. And let's move the plane out of the way, and let's just take the subdivision surface and make it a child of the Boxee control. So now when I select that, I can move it around. I can do all the translates. Let's do 0. Right? So this is at 0, 0. I have my character on here. I don't want to move the box. Right? If I select the box, it's like moving the character off the controller or off the skeleton, right? So then I start to get weird little things like this if I was going to rotate it, right? So I want it centered on this little controller to do what I need to do, especially if I want it to move and then animate forward, right, or backwards. And then of course I could also do the bend. Right, where are we at? 16 minutes. So right now we have the basics of the character. There's some little cleanup that we could do, but I'm going to save that maybe for the kind of a little follow-up tutorial after this. So let's recap. Setting up a character, making sure that it has the appropriate geometry for whatever it is you want to do with the animation, like the deformers, I guess, as part of the animation. And then also setting up some controllers that we could use to drive the animation. When I start the next tutorial, we'll look at how to simplify the selection of these objects, like selecting the Boxee cylinder here and not being able to select some of these others. All right, so I'll call that a wrap, and then we'll see you in the next one.